right off. Welcome to today's session and thank you for joining us. We're definitely looking forward to getting stuck into this great session by Mark. He's prepared for you today some really great information on project scheduling within the traditional agile and hybrid work environments. Just before we begin, as always, some small housekeeping notes. If you could please remain on mute throughout the presentation, that would be great. However, if you do have a question anytime throughout, please feel free to either pop it in the chat or raise your hand and speak out. We'd love to get everybody involved and engaged in this session. I will now pass you on to Mark, who will take you through some best practice management for project scheduling. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Alice. Hello, lovely people. Wow, I tell you, this was a very interesting topic this time. Some topics are more interesting than others, I'm sure, but we are living in a wonderful world of traditional and agile world, and therefore we thought it is a good idea to outline what scheduling actually looks like in the 21st century. Just very quickly, I'm going through the agenda. We'll talk about the different methods of scheduling and therefore very much touch the traditional versus agile and hybrid scheduling capability, of course. I will go through a couple of examples when it comes to the tool sets and would also like to open it up for discussion a little bit later to see what you guys are actually doing in the wonderful world of scheduling. And then the second part of the presentation really is around, well, it's great that I know what kind of scheduling I may have and how I may schedule, but what does that actually mean in the context of an organization? How do I actually consolidate information and data by utilizing different or concurrently different schedule capabilities? And then at the end, I'm going to open up through Q&A. However, I will put some Q&As because there were lots and lots of questions. Thank you for submitting them beforehand. There were lots of questions already asked, and I will utilize some of my slide decks to answer some of those questions in the appropriate area. All right, now with no further ado, the first and utmost important slide, of course, is why do we schedule these days? And in order for us to answer that, I would like you to look at your screen right now. There are some polls that I would like you to fill in. Why do we schedule? Is that because we want to determine our budget or determine our time? Is that because I need to organize my project work, or is it just simply a communication tool for my team and stakeholder? Or do we ultimately want to predict the future of our project when we're talking about scheduling? So if you could submit your answer, that would be awesome. I can already see there are 22 votes. We have many more people, so I'm going to wait just a couple of seconds longer. 32, there you go. And interestingly enough, if we look at the answers, there are some very close ones. Of course, determining budget, funnily enough, is actually one of those areas that becomes less and less. Interestingly to know, I do work with quite a lot of organizations that actually determine their budget based on the work breakdown structure. But I think the big winner here is right now organize project work, which is quite interesting because from my point of view, I used to being a schedule expert and project MVP for quite a few years. I used to always say, well, in order for us to schedule or in order for us to predict the future of our project, we either have a crystal ball, which hasn't worked for me, or we have a project schedule that outlines essentially the type of work that we do. We plan that work, the dependencies of that, the duration, effort, the resource assignment, etc. However, in the wonderful world of agility, that actually changes, and you can actually see that on your voting. It really is starting to organize the work that we do as part of our project, really. So the second poll that I would like you to answer is, well, how important is scheduling actually in your project or in your environment? You know, do you all schedule your project, or some projects may have schedules, some don't? Every project does it differently, or don't you do any scheduling at all? So it would be interesting to see what your take on that is. If you could submit your answers. And yeah, you can see at least we have a 0% of we don't use schedule. Oh no, there is 2%. We don't use schedules. Look, there are actually organizations out there that don't use schedules. And quite often these are organizations that engage external vendors that actually manage the schedule for them. So project managers are then often contract managers that agree to certain key dates or milestones as their deliverable, and therefore they don't maintain their own schedule. So it does make sense in many ways. However, the big winner here, of course, is we schedule all of our projects, which is good to see. And of course, the next cap of the rank is some projects have schedules and some don't. And again, the purpose of scheduling can vary, of course, depending on whether you manage the project or whether someone from you manages the project. Excellent. Thank you very much. So, well, based on that information, I think the first thing that we really should focus on is, well, you know, what kind of schedule information do we actually manage? And you will find in the traditional versus the agile world, there are actually differences. I like to call the traditional world, the traditional scheduling really being a sequential way of planning your projects, whereby in an agile world, it is very much an iterative approach of managing your schedule through so-called sprints. And when I look at the information that we actually manage as part of our project schedule, you will see that depending on what type of information you manage or what type of schedule you manage, there are some commonalities between the agile world and the traditional world. I sort of try to outline that, of course, with the red highlight area. And you will find that things like phases, well, that's generally managed in sort of a sequential way, in a traditional way where we need to design, plan, execute, and close our projects. We could probably turn that into an agile terminology of sprints, where we really outline different sprints as part of our project, where we want to be able to accomplish, of course, our tasks. Now, some of you may think, well, effort may not be necessarily something that I would manage in my agile task, but we do that actually through so-called story points, and story points are, of course, another form for us to manage effort and the amount of time that it takes to complete a task. Whereby in other areas, of course, you will see that things like dependencies and constraints are quite often probably more in a traditional sense managed. And that's because of the nature of the work that we do. So one of the questions that the audience has was, you know, what are the critical elements that Sensei believes are needed in all project schedule, no matter whether the scale of the project or the type of the tool, etc., through critical path or one of these other areas? Well, to be quite frank, if we boil it down and if we boil down scheduling, we do want to organize our work. And the work that we organize, we do that actually in terms of tasks. So of course, every schedule should have tasks associated to that schedule. That's ultimately why we do that. How we then organize those tasks is actually dependent on the type of work that we do. And when I talk about the type of work that we do, well, I very often talk about the concept of methodology. Now, when we are talking about methodology, these days they are probably referred to as business process flows, because methodologies, of course, has changed over the last 20 years. I remember in the good old Prince 2 days, where it was a very sequential way of working, lots of documentation and supporting documentation, of course, to then the PMI, which was sort of a framework of methodologies, to now the scaled agile framework, which enables us as an organization to manage agility. And then, of course, a lot, if not most, organizations that are tinkering in both the traditional and agile way have actually a so-called hybrid approach to their methodology. So when you think about scheduling, our project management, and as part of that scheduling, you will have to think about, well, what type of work is it actually that we want to accomplish? Well, and with that, I wanted to outline sort of the different types of work. And before we go into more detail, when I refer to waterfall, it's actually a traditional way. Hybrid is a combined way, and agile is, of course, the pure agile way. In your own environment, what type of methodology do you use? Do you use only one, or do you use a combination of them? It would be interesting to see where your world is leading us these days. And look, interestingly enough, the type of work or methodology that we use is also very much industry dependent. You wouldn't want to, I don't know, build a house or a big skyscraper in an agile fashion. There is, of course, the sequential way of designing and planning, which is a very big portion of a project. So therefore, of course, the traditional path makes a lot of sense. The agility or the agile methodology is predominantly used these days in the software world or in the IT industry. And that actually has to do a lot to do with user adoption, where at the very start, we may know what we want to accomplish, but we don't know the detailed end result. Unlike a building where I know, I have 3 windows in the 7th floor and 4 windows in the 6th floor beforehand. In the software world, we often rely, of course, on the feedback of our users. And that really leads us into sort of the difference between the different type of works. When I look at a traditional way, well, as I mentioned, this is a very linear planning way. The completion of phases is actually sequential and most important, of course, to complete a particular project. And quite often we have a very clear scope of work towards that. Again, industries, building industries, construction, utilities, these are classical waterfall or traditional ways. You do need to plan ahead, and you need to make sure that your bill of material is there, that the right building inspector and site is ready to do those buildings. And of course, we have a very clear budget versus the deliverable. We know this is the end result and it's going to cost us that way. I call the traditional way very much a project-centric way, where we literally focus on projects. When I compare that to the agile world, which is actually a non-linear process, it is a so-called iterative process, where we focus very much on teamwork and flexibility. And when I say flexibility, it literally means that we do have an understanding, of course, what our deliverables are going to be. But at that point in time, these deliverables may change based on, well, the feedback we get from the team. And teams or customers as part of those teams will give us feedback on a sprint by sprint basis or on an iterative basis. And based on that feedback, we actually then have the ability to replan the next sprint, outlining the highest value that we want to accomplish very early in the process of the project. So therefore, when it comes to budgets and scope, it is actually quite difficult to determine at the very start, this is how much money I need, and this is what you're going to get. Most of the agile projects are very much team-centric, where we actually request, well, sprint budgets, where I know I have a particular team and that team will fully work on a particular project in a sprint. And I know I'm planning right now 3 or 4 sprints. And based on that, I do have the ability to produce or create my budget. I refer to that as a time-boxed way of managing projects. A lot of organizations that are moving down the scaled agile framework path actually don't consider projects as such. They do consider deliverables or outputs as such. So therefore, the team continuously works towards the overarching outcome, and that overarching outcome actually changes through portfolio agility and through storylines and through epics that are literally a continuous train of features that need to be produced. That's why I call an agile path a team-centric path. So based on the feedback that you just provided in the poll, I can also see that the hybrid approach is probably the one that most organizations go through. The waterfall agile approach, the agile approach as it used to be called, now the proper term for that is actually a hybrid approach, where we still need to actually plan in a traditional way, where we need to design, plan, so that we get the appropriate budget, because executive management, after all, still need to approve that. And the deliverables around that project is then also well understood. The scope is scoped within reason. However, the execution of a project then happens through sprints, and the feedback that we then receive through those sprints, we can then put into our backlog. And this backlog is essentially a list of, I would almost call it, change requests, that if we wanted to bring those deliverables or those feedbacks into the next sprint, that we get that approved from our business stakeholders or from our product stakeholder, depending on what kind of project it is. You will find that a hybrid project approach is also very much a project-centric approach, where by the end of that project, things actually need to be delivered, not so much as a sort of release train as it is classically in an agile world. And I think that's why a lot of organizations actually struggle with that migration from traditional into agile. I know agile is really that new buzzword. However, the balance between those two make us as an organization really a hybrid organization. All right, so that's the type of works, and really from a scheduling perspective, the ability for us to determine that. It's interesting, you will find that a lot of schedule tools, and I'm going to refer to them these days as execution tools. They're actually not just scheduling tools. They are executing the project. You will find that there are a lot of features that we traditionally knew about that are just not forming part of a new execution tool. A classical example is a baseline. In an agile environment, you don't have that concept of a baseline, because you don't actually have a detailed work breakdown structure that is completely structured throughout the entire project. And what I'm going to do is I'll show you a couple of different execution tools so that you can see what that actually entails. However, before I do that, I just wanted to sort of outline, and I know that's not a very pretty PowerPoint deck, but I wanted to outline sort of the top 10 differences that we see in the industry. And if you actually Google traditional versus agile, you will see that resonates a lot with organizations. So on one hand, of course, project complexity, what needs to be accomplished, will actually determine the way that we decide whether it's a traditional or an agile approach. Again, I've mentioned that beforehand, that we have the ability to know exactly what the outcome is in comparison to where we have an iterative approach and therefore build higher value as we go along. Adaptability, do I know what the outcome will be? As I mentioned, the iterative approach is allowing us to be there for more flexible. And then, of course, scope for feedback and changes. You will find in a traditional way, finding room for scope change is actually not built into the schedule. That's why in a traditional sense, when you have additional scope, you do need to request additional funds for that scope. Whereby in an agile path, we do recognize that changes happen through stakeholder engagements. I think the concept of transparency is a very big difference, in particular when we think about sprints versus status updates. A status update really outlines, provides a picture of where I'm currently tracking with my project until the end, whereby a sprint review enables us to change directions based on what we actually deliver. One of the biggest parts, and I think particular in the agile path, is accountability. In an agile team, every single team member is actually accountable for every single task that they accomplish. Whereby in a traditional sense, you will find that very often the project manager has that accountability when we talk about traditional path, because they take the accountability on the budget and on the effort and on the scope, and try to track in accordance to the entire plan. Project scope, we already outlined that, a firm scope in a traditional sense versus a flexible scope. And then, of course, feature prioritization, where in a traditional sense, we know what we need to deliver based on our design plan and execution. In the agile path, we actually determine the prioritization of features based on the highest value that a particular feature provides us with, or a particular deliverable provides us with. That's why very often it is said that the agile project delivers higher value earlier and then drops the value over time because the highest value has been delivered early, whereby in a traditional sense it builds up to ultimately provide that highest value at the end. I know there can be philosophies behind that, and I'm very interested when we go into the discussion phase what your take on that is. Feature prioritization, of course, lots to do there as well. And then, of course, the individual approach to testing in particular, where again, the team member is actually responsible in the agile, and testing is done part of each individual sprint, whereby in comparison to a traditional project, quite often, user acceptance testing in an IT world was always done at the end, and then we had to change that at the end as well. So that's one of the reasons why agile is actually so incredibly powerful in an IT world. Change in focus point really means that the end user experience versus the known outcome. And I always like to make that differentiator between a software and the ability for me to develop a software and get feedback from users. And I'm sure for those of you who use things like Office 365, you often get a feedback form saying, hey, how do you enjoy that feature, or do you use that feature? Actually, a development team and a product team utilizes that kind of information to groom their backlog, ensuring that they provide that highest value. Whereby when I have a known outcome at the end, like a building, for example, I don't need to have that constant feedback, of course. And then time, and I mentioned that already, sprint versus phases, of course. There are some benefits, of course, from an agile perspective, and there are some benefits from a traditional perspective. And again, it is all about the type of work that we do. In an IT world, agility makes a lot of sense. Services agility makes a lot of sense, but construction, infrastructure, etc., traditional makes more sense because we do have that clearly defined objective. There are some different characteristics. I'm not going to go through all of them. We will actually provide you that slide deck at the end. We'll send that to you so that you can just see some variations between that. On one hand, of course, it's super important to know what is my organizational structure and what do I actually want to accomplish as part of my organization, and that already determines that agile versus the traditional approach. We see quite often in service industries or even financial industries that the move to agility, from traditional to agility, has really taken a lot of shape. Of course, traditionally software organizations and IT organizations, whereby the traditional paths are still, of course, the infrastructure and building part. Scale of project, of course, quite often you will find that small and medium scale is more in an agile path because you can change quickly. The larger ones that need to really have a big prediction of the outcome, like buildings, are more in the traditional sense. Yeah, look, I encourage you to read through some of those areas when you are, or if you are in an organization that is thinking about those different areas. However, before I continue and introduce some of the tool sets, I would like to open up the board for discussion and hear a little bit of feedback what your journey was and where you are currently in regards to managing your schedules or your projects, moving them from traditional into agile. Have you had some experience in that? And we've got about 70 people on board. I hope that there are some that have had that kind of experience. Don't be shy. So, Thomas, please.
Hello. So my company has gone through a bit of a restructure. They've been looking to change from a waterfall kind of methodology to more so something that resembles agile. In looking at the table there that demonstrates, well, the table that you showed before with characteristics, it would probably more so resemble still very much a traditional or waterfall methodology. We have very fixed requirements documents. We however, do use our resources in a more flexible manner, using them in sprints, but at the same time, it is still sprints within phases. So it's probably a hybrid of a hybrid between traditional and hybrid kind of thing. It is interesting though, because I have seen, I guess through previous education and whatnot, that there is a lot of confusion around people think they're using agile when they really aren't. It is still very much waterfall. But yeah, it is insightful, just better understanding that, and how our business kind of profile works out. And we do kind of work in the small to medium scale. So by looks of that, it does make sense by definition of that to use agile. But I come from as well a construction background, so I am heavy-hearted waterfall methodology all the way.
Yeah, and I hear that, and organizations often want to try to move over. In our experience, we have seen that the change management often actually has to come from executive management, because an agile change needs to flow top down. And as you said, if an organization still requires detailed documentations and approval processes in order to determine the scope, well, then that attitude of agility is actually not necessarily in the executives' minds. So we see that quite often, that it's not so much teams don't want to do that, they quite often push for that. It's the understanding on a senior and executive level where this change needs to happen, because there are certain processes that are just so ingrained in an organization. For example, annual budgets. How do we distribute that? What are we going to get out of that at the end? If they have that term of, well, we are trying as good as we can, cynically speaking, in an agile world, then they will find that quite difficult at times. So yeah, thank you for your feedback there. Paul.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Very interesting. Actually, you answered a bit of my question that I have. I tend to find that usually in these scenarios, one of the most important part for people are the CFO, and how they think about projects and how we execute them. I don't know whether you have any advice around, for instance, how we shape funding cycles to be able to work within this hybrid or agile approach.
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. So what I can do is I can refer to the Scaled Agile Framework. For those of you who don't know what the Scaled Agile Framework is, I encourage you, literally set the website's called www.scaledagileFramework.com. There's a wonderful picture, and there are different levels of capabilities how an organization can introduce that Scaled Agile. And Scaled Agile is not just Agile, it's actually lean and agile, where it really starts at the top. even though the introduction of Agile happens often on a team level at the foundation, the attitude and the mindset needs to start shaping on the leadership level. So you will find very successful transitions are actually transitions where the idea from traditional to Agile comes from the leadership, because they want to be able to adopt very quickly to new situations, especially over the last 1.5 to 2 years with COVID. That has become an absolute forefront thinking in executives' people's mind, where they know an annual plan or even a 5-year plan is just not realistic, because the world is changing so quickly. So the advice that I would give to our customers is literally an awareness creation top down, not so much bottom up. Alex. Alex, so you have your hands up.
Mark, for our clients, we're using different tools, and that depends on maturity which they need. If they are okay with it, like low and average maturity, MS Project and Primavera normally do the work, because they have critical path method and can do what is needed. However, these tools are limited with risk integration and does not allow it to do a lot of things. So for clients who do need mature waterfall, we're using a tool which called Spider Project. This is great for waterfall, and it's allowed to build a risk integrated schedules with the cost, benefits, and other areas. And it's also allowed to use waterfall and Agile together, because Agile is a lot of resource base. It's really on your resource optimization, your resource allocation to your sprints, to your activities. And tools like Jira is great to do this for prioritization perspective, but it does not take into account skills and other things. So yeah, so I can see you have these old tools on the screen.
Oh, Alex, thank you. Really appreciate that feedback, and I couldn't agree more. Look, the reason why I haven't spoken about tools this far is because tools are the underlining enabler to execute our projects. And I've been in the industry for a very long time, and in the past it really was the aim to build project management maturity up in an organization up until such time where everybody has the ability to manage projects in an efficient manner. Now, fact is these days, and the recognition of that is, organizations will always have a big variety of project management maturity levels. The industry these days talks about that in an adaptive project management world, where they literally say, well, utilize the right tool that you feel comfortable with. And you've outlined it already, Alex, the MS projects and the Primavera of the world. Well, they are awesome scheduling tools, right? But they require a professional project manager or even a full-time scheduler to schedule those. And in industries like building, construction, utilities, that makes just a lot of sense. Whereby other organizations where they say, well, look, I'm not so much interested in critical path, and I'm more interested in ease of use and organizing my team. Agile tools actually bring much more out than that. John, I'm going to open up for you. What's your take on that?
Hi, Mark. Thank you, and really interesting show. I'm an Agile evangelist, but I do believe that there are times when a traditional approach is required. So I just wanted to run that past you in the sense that where you need to have resources that are a lot of external touch points, where resources are needing to be scheduled in for specific times, and then they have a long lead time to say that you need them from this date to that date. The second thing is where you have a reasonably short-term delivery schedule where one needs to have certainty on the scope that needs to be delivered for a particular deadline that has a business impact if it's not delivered on that specific day, and that where you can have some variability of scope, you can't go beyond a certain minimum level. And I think the one minimum level you could have there is if you're doing a system replacement, then if you have normally the baseline requirement for that is a like-for-like replacement. We don't want to go backwards in terms of the functionality that needs to be available. So I would say the key for me is whether there's certainty required, and you have those external touch points that need to be brought in at different times to do different tasks, and there's a lot of dependency between them, then I think that would make a lot of the Scrum type arrangements a little bit more tricky to implement in the short term.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And John, a prime example, where especially when you have external dependencies on delivering those projects, right? You can, and I've seen that before, obviously, you know, being an agile as well as waterfall evangelist, depending on what kind of job it really is. But you would probably do this sort of in sprint terms, because at least you know, okay, you know, the next sprint or in 2 sprints times, that's in 4 weeks time, and that's when I can schedule those in. But yeah, look, I hear exactly what you're saying when it comes to again, agility. That's super important. No, I didn't include P6 into the schedule. I should have. I'm sorry, into the poll. But you know, if it's P6, yeah, sorry, should have included that in here. So look, the tool set is one way of managing that, and ensuring that we find the right tool set is also very important. Traditionally, and we can see that here actually again on the key results, you know, MS Project and Project for the Web seems to be sort of a big part, whereby, you know, there are other tools, Planner or even the equivalent, and I couldn't add them all to it, you know, whether that's Monday.com or Asana or Trello or Primavera for that. There is a purpose for all of these tools, and otherwise there would only ever be one tool that rules them all, right? Yeah, look, and even Atlassian acknowledges that for some of the scheduling you do need to have that capability in traditional tools. Interestingly enough, though, the combination of different tools, and that's what we see these days in larger organization where IT uses Jira, operations uses Project, marketing uses Trello or Planner, where they really try to utilize the tool that they feel most comfortable with. And that's why the industry of adaptive project management these days has literally changed from process before people, meaning, hey, you need to strictly follow that process no matter what type of project it is, to people before process, where there's an element of commonality across all of these projects. And these are very often artifacts like, hey, no matter whether I've got an agile or waterfall project, you need to manage risks, you need to manage issues, you need to manage change requests, you need to manage a certain amount of financials. So that is that commonality. But when it comes to the execution, yeah, people before process really enables the end user to do exactly that. Alex mentioned it before, and look, I'm just going to outline some of those questions that are coming, that came about. One of them, of course, says, you know, software selection is virtually important. Is virtually important when it comes to scheduling. The tool and its function must match the needs of the project team and the ability to provide information to stakeholders. Microsoft Project is an excellent tool for small and medium-sized projects, portfolios, but becomes problematic when talking very large, complex projects. And I guess that's where, you know, the Primaveras of the world, of course, come in and they're designed for exactly that. And that's why they are so awesome in it. Yeah, Alex, you mentioned risk association to tasks. Yeah, well, Primavera does that in a very beautiful way. However, try to get a project manager knowing how Primavera works and what scheduling is about. Look, I'm an accountant by trade, and when I ask an accountant, do you know what accounting practices are? They tell me, yes, I know what profit and loss is, and I know what balance sheets are. When I ask a project manager saying, hey, do you know what the practice of scheduling is? They say, oh yeah, look, I had an MS Project course. So they very often refer scheduling towards a tool instead of the methodology or process of why we do scheduling. So yeah, it's absolutely right. The second part here was, how to plan agile methodology in a project schedule, how to plan sprints in detail or high level. That was also a question we get asked very often. Now, as an evangelist of agile, and John, you are one of them, you understand the process of detailing your sprints. Now, it needs to be clear that tasks in a sprint need to be understood. Now, when you have your backlog, and this backlog needs to be broken down into storylines and into tasks, these tasks that are then coming into the sprint need to be understood by the entire team, because a purist when it comes to agility means that any kind of team member within your agile team can actually pick up a task from the board and move them over and conducts that work. Being flexible is key. Yep, that's exactly right, Mark. And again, what type of information do I need to provide on an organizational level? That is key. Yes, it's very true, Alex. And sometimes agile projects are an excuse for, scope creep, no documentation, all of those things. How can I work in project online and DevOps? I'll show you that in a second from an organizational perspective. The other question that was asked here is, which scenario keeps citizen project managers engaged? Wonderful question. So a citizen project manager, Microsoft often refers to that as an accidental project manager. I hate that term. We are all project managers. Every single user and staff member in an organization is involved in work, and work is conducted often through projects. So in my world here, I wanted to quickly outline just a couple of different tools where, again, the simplicity of that tool is super important. How does Agile deal with variation? The variation in an Agile world, well, there is no such thing as a predefined scope. You get budgets through different sprints, so duration really is the key here. And the backlog that you groom as you get feedback through the sprint reviews, you actually outline those backlogs as potential changes. That potentially means that you need to add another sprint in order to accommodate for that. So that's how generally in an agile world how change is managed. All right, let me just show you, and again, I'm just going to spend a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes on there just so that you can see what is possible. Now, Microsoft has, for all of your Office 365 users, Microsoft has a Kanban or a project capability is called the Planner. And this is the Planner hub here. So that literally means is if I create a new plan, I have the ability to create so-called buckets, and I can create new tasks and have here my new task. That I can then, of course, set a particular due date. So literally an easy and intuitive way of managing the information here. The reason why I showcase that is because as a citizen project manager, well, this is generally a very intuitive tool where I can just simply write down my tasks. I can create certain progress parts and prioritization, maybe some checklists, some attachments, and there are lots of those kinds of tools out there. We are obviously a Microsoft shop, and therefore we show the Planner, but there's, Trello is the competing part, or Monday.com, or Asana, which I would refer to as schedule tools, maybe not, task tools, maybe not necessarily schedule tools as such. And of course, you then have the ability to create simple task graphs here to what has started, what kind of buckets are done, what kind of priority is done. You can even have sort of a bit of a schedule where new tasks, as soon as you have due dates, are actually outlined when they are due. But that's really a nice and intuitive way of managing your lightweight projects from a citizen project manager's perspective. So that's a very nice tool for you to just simply, drag and drop. Hey, I'm doing this right now, or I've done my new task and now I'm setting it to complete. And as I set it to complete, it will just simply set it to complete in its own right. So intuitive, you give the user the tool that they feel comfortable with. Well, when I now compare that to something like, MS Project or Primavera for that, well, there is a certain amount of knowledge that you need to have. You need to understand what the difference between duration is. What the difference between effort and duration is, which is called work in projects. What impact it has when you move certain tasks over. If you assign resources, what does that mean? If you actually baseline that, and if you need to determine critical path, these are certainly things that a citizen project manager or an everyday user wouldn't necessarily know. A professional project manager knows that. Just so that you know, of course, Project provides you a hybrid capability as well, where you can literally have your task board as well as your sprint board, where you can plan your different sprints through the tasks. So on one hand, you can create dependencies. On the other hand, you actually can, through a Kanban board, manage those kinds of sprints. That, of course, translates also through the concept of Project for the web, which is Microsoft's new schedule tool, new kid on the block. You will find that they have that hybrid approach as well. Again, for lightweight projects, for citizen project managers, or for not necessarily all that professional project managers, this is a nice and intuitive way of creating your task list with a work breakdown structure as well. But at the same time, you can collaborate through boards with your team, where you can literally say, hey, my test script is completed. How much time did I spend on it? What's the remaining time? I can add notes and assign resources to all of those project tasks. So it's also, again, a very intuitive way utilizing Microsoft Project for the web. And of course, because it is a hybrid capability, it also allows you to create dependencies between those tasks, something that the task management tools like Trello or Planner, for that matter, actually are not all that good at. Microsoft is planning to migrate or allow you to start with a Planner plan and then move those Planner tasks into Project for the web in the future, so that you can build up your projects in its own right. That being said, these are Microsoft products. They are, of course, very, very familiar agile tools that are out there, and most IT departments use that. Jira being one of them, of course, where you have that classical Kanban capability, where you have calendar views as well, and timelines, where you can create forms, where you can manage issues. However, when it comes to things like financial management, well, this is not a project management tool in its own right. It is an execution tool. And that's where it is important that we understand from a team's perspective. That's great. Collaboration and ease of use and agility, of course, through drag and drop and Kanbaning is great. But of course, from an organizational perspective, there's a little bit more behind that. And there's another one that I just want to quickly outline. So that's Jira here. And then, of course, the equivalent in the Microsoft world is what they call Azure DevOps or Azure Boards, has essentially the same capability, more sort of an IT and software capability, where you can add, test plans and where you can check in your code when it comes to software development. So that's what those different execution tools are. I could have an entire session when it comes to execution tools. I just wanted to outline that depending on the type of project and the maturity level of your project manager or executor is determining what type of tool you want to use. And large organizations, look, there is not one tool fits all. Every tool has its advantages. As Alex said, Primavera is awesome to develop deep forecast schedule tools with risk equations and what if analysis, whereby for small BAU type work, things like Planner is there. If you, interestingly enough, Microsoft did a survey on all of the different projects that organizations work in. 80% of projects are actually lightweight projects in organization, even though the 20% of the real professional projects are the one that consume most of the budget. Now, I'm conscious of time. I only have another 10 minutes to go. So therefore, I need to, is a project manager always required? Great question, Thomas. No, I don't believe that there are. And the reason why I say that is because every user needs to understand how to manage work. And really, a project is nothing else but a piece of work that has a task breakdown structure and a start and finish date. This is really what adaptive project management is. Now, in a higher in an organization, in a larger organization, we can often see, well, I'm going to call it the hybrid PMO, where both areas literally have the ability to manage the projects as it is appropriate, where IT uses Agile, where construction uses traditional, and combined, you still have that overarching view of your projects. Key here is to determine what's the information that I need from an organizational specific point of view. And when I think about that, well, a portfolio view, no matter what kind of execution tool it is, can actually easily be accomplished to the point where in that view here, for example, you can see these are different execution tools, but still have that same structure of a project. Let me give you a quick example. Where am I? I'm here. So in this particular example, there's nothing else but Microsoft Power BI, where I join this information together, where I let my project managers or my project team literally utilize the execution tool of their choice. So in that instance, I know that no matter what type of execution tool you use, well, there are still certain areas of deliverables, of scheduling, of financials, of issues and risks and changes that need to be managed. And when I go into this one here, for example, is a Jira project. Well, as a project manager, of course, I need to manage all of my execution capability, but above everything, there are certain processes that I need to follow, no matter what type of project that is, and there are certain artifacts that I need to follow. So in that instance, I still know that this is a major project, but my project team is an IT project team. They are using Jira. So therefore, I can just simply see all of my Jira tasks and board tasks and can manage them appropriately, but at the same time have the ability to manage things like financials. So what you see here is Microsoft Power Apps. Power Apps is sort of that no-code, low-code capability that allows you to combine all of those areas, whether this is finance, whether this is risks or issues. You will see that the overarching project artifacts, they will always remain the same, no matter what type and methodology of projects you use. So this one here is, for, as I mentioned, this is an Agile project. But of course, if I use MS Project, for example, this one here, when I open this up, again, the same concept applies. In that instance, it's also, again, a major project with all of the main artifacts like risks and issues, of course. And of course, I can manage all of my tasks and my project in that traditional sense, in that traditional waterfall approach, and can manage all of those tasks accordingly. That, of course, means that my project is managed in the way that I want to. I have my insights across all of my projects. But at the same time, I can even go and have a portfolio view across all of those projects, because no matter what type of project it is, in that instance, for example, I'm just going to go into my IT portfolio. Again, there's nothing else but Power BI, what you see here. But in that instance, I know what the commonality is. So my portfolio needs to manage risks, no matter whether it's an Agile project or a waterfall project or program. I actually have that information consolidated. Whether this is financial information, where I can see all of the different projects, of course. Let me just open that up quickly and can see these are, this is a waterfall project, this is an agile project, but the finances still need to be managed accordingly, of course, and a project manager can do that. Or whether this is things like, risks, issues, change requests from a program or sub-project point of view, I can very easily consolidate that on a portfolio basis. So when we think about a hybrid and a hybrid capability, that we need to think about what does executive management want to see, and these are then the type of artifacts that I need to manage, at the same time allowing project managers or team members to utilize the tool of their choice. So that's just a way of how we see adaptive project management enables an organization to actually allow to manage either side of it. So how do dashboards and reports interact with project scheduling and traditional agile and hybrid work? As I mentioned, it is important that we know the commonality about the projects that I need to manage across my organization. And then there was a very big question about resource management, being conscious of time. I want to quickly outline that because we said it before, and I think, John, you mentioned it before as well. The ability for me to manage a team, no matter whether this is an agile or a traditional part, is actually very complicated. Now, in a traditional schedule, you can assign resources. This is a time-phased approach, and therefore I have the ability to determine what kind of resources I have. Well, in an agile world, I don't have that. I generally have a full-time agile team that needs to manage work. In order to get that type of work, we actually differentiate between resource planning and resource scheduling, whereby a project manager has the ability to request the resources that they need to conduct work. The resource manager has then the ability to approve the resources so that the team knows exactly what kind of work and what kind of projects they're working on. And once the approved resources have happened, the project manager then has the ability to schedule them in a whole bunch of different worlds. This can be either in the planner, this can be in Project Online, this can be in Jira, this can be in DevOps, this could be in everything. So we see that these days very often that resource planning and resource scheduling are actually two separate disciplines. On one hand, we want to ensure that we have the resources available. On the other hand, we want to make sure that the resources know what they need to conduct. Now, there are, of course, different tools how you can utilize that, just so that you can see what that can look like in the Microsoft world. Let me just quickly go here. It literally allows me, here I'm in a particular project, and now let's say I want to request a resource, let's say a business analyst. You literally have the ability now to either do this on a monthly basis or weekly basis or even on a daily basis, depending on what you want to do. And you can now say, hey, I need to have 20 hours worth of a business analyst, or 40 hours worth of a business analyst, or 50 hours worth of a business analyst. You submit that, you then get those resources approved. Once these resources are approved, you can schedule them. Now, there are actually tools that allow you to do the bottom up, where you schedule first, and then the information that you scheduled moves that into that resource plan for approval. So that's generally how we see how those resources are managed in a hybrid or in an agile world. So don't confuse resource planning with resource scheduling. They are sort of that keynote that I wanted to outline. Why do I say that? Because again, one of the questions was, how do resource allocation process differ from ongoing product management? Well, actually, if you have an ongoing product management, you should always have this team as the full-time team. This is your agile team that manages that product. And that's what I've seen in many organizations, and that's how it works. Examples of where both processes run concurrently, where resources are split between project A and project B, you need to have that resource engagement or that resource planning where you approve those projects. Otherwise, your project manager drives blind. Another part was, using IQ. Okay, what's the best practice for resource utilization and resource calendar management? Okay, again, that is the resource plan more so. We want to make sure that that the resource engagement model is there. For all of those IQ users, please contact us separately. The resource engagement model is on its way there. Now, I know we've gone through lots and lots of content, and I'm not sure whether, no, I'm actually sure that this won't be the last time we will have those discussions. I'd love to have your feedback on what needs to be covered in order for your organization to run in that hybrid, agile, or traditional sense. Today, it really was about, it was all about scheduling and how we schedule. Abdul, do we need to use Power Apps, Power BI? Look, it depends. There are different tools out there that enables you to do that. We at Sensei, that's what we do because we are a Microsoft partner, of course. So therefore, the Power family, Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI is what we use in order to develop our solution, for example. Now, there were a couple of other questions that are outlined, how practical is it to generate, track, and time and material cost on each tasks, in particular in an agile environment? Well, that is a very good question. There is the difference between timesheeting, and you can actually timesheet your task if it is important. It depends on the business and how deep you want to go down to that level and how much you need to know about those material costs. That is key here. Another couple of other questions are outlined here, but before I answer some of those, I know some of you have to go. Are there any questions that you may have?
Really enjoyed the session, Mark.
Thank you. I know this is a session that can be extended, and please give us your feedback. I think that's super important. So from our point of view, I will answer some of those questions in the slide deck that we sent to you, just so that you have them as well. As the next step, please follow. We will have those recordings, of course, available to you. We will send you the PowerPoint slide deck. Give us your feedback, and I'd love to know what other areas you would be interested in. I'm sure in the coming months we will actually do a part 2 of that session, so that that we cover everything. With that in mind, Alice, is there anything else that we need to cover?
All good, Mark. I think we've covered everything we have time for today. As always, everyone, thank you for your engagement today. And like Mark said, please let us know if there's any questions you have or any other topics you'd like to see from us. We really want to make sure we're providing the best insight and valuable content to you that we can.
Yeah, and clearly this is a topic that is in the forefront of every organization. So please, give us your feedback so that we can actually hone in a little bit deeper into the wonderful world of scheduling in a traditional, agile, and hybrid way. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for your time and have an awesome day.
Thank you.